The Steel Sanctuary. It was a quiet evening in Willow Creek, a sleepy suburb in northern Georgia, when I got the alert that changed everything. I was sprawled on my couch, half watching a YouTube tutorial on smoking ribs, when my phone buzzed with a notification from my garage cameras. I flicked to the live feed, expecting a stray cat or maybe a gust of wind rattling the door. Instead, I saw her Margaret Hensley, the self-appointed queen of the Willow Creek Homeowners Association, standing in my locked workshop, poking through my tools with a flashlight in one hand and a coffee tumbler in the other. The door was wide open, and the padlock snapped clean off. My blood boiled. This wasn't just a nosy neighbor. This was a violation. I'd moved to Willow Creek 3 years ago, chasing peace after a long career as a structural engineer. My new home sat on a half-acre lot, bordered by pines, with a sprawling garage I'd turned into a metalworking haven. It was my sanctuary, rows of grinders, welders, and custom projects for clients who liked my knack for turning scrap into art. The driveway was long, the neighbors distant, and I thought I'd left petty drama behind in the city. Then Margaret showed up. She knocked on my door 2 days after I moved in, clipboard in hand, her ash blonde hair pulled into a tight bun. "Mr. Daniel Carter," she said, not asking, "you'll need to remove that sign." I was still in my flannel pajamas, sipping coffee, and had no idea what she meant. She pointed to a small plaque by my mailbox advertising my side business, custom metalwork. "Commercial activity isn't allowed in Willow Creek," she declared. I explained my property wasn't part of the HOA, a fact clear in my deed. She gave me a thin smile. "We'll see about that." From then on, Margaret made me her project. She filed complaints with the county about unpermitted structures, my garage, which passed every inspection. She sent letters claiming my welding posed a fire hazard. Once, she reported my metal sculpture of a hawk to animal control, calling it menacing. I brushed it off. I'd dealt with bureaucrats my whole life. They faded when the law wasn't on their side. But Margaret wasn't fading. She wanted control, and she wasn't subtle about it. Things got weirder. I started noticing oddities in my workshop: tools misplaced, a welder's torch left warm, a client's prototype gate hinge unwrapped and moved. I chalked it up to my forgetfulness at first. I'm 56, and late-night projects can blur together. But doubt crept in. So, I installed a high-def security system, cameras tucked into corners, feeding live to my phone and laptop. 3 days later, Margaret tripped the motion sensor. There she was, in designer leggings and a puffy vest, creeping into my garage with bolt cutters. She rummaged through my workbench, picking up a plasma cutter like she was judging a yard sale. I watched, stunned, as she muttered to herself, snapping photos with her phone. I could have called the sheriff right then. I could have stormed out and confronted her. But I'm not a yeller. I'm a builder. And builders don't react, they create. Margaret had crossed a line, and I was going to draw one of my own and steal. I spent 2 nights sketching a plan, a modular steel frame, strong enough to make a point but removable, legal, and precise. The target? Her beloved silver Cadillac Escalade, which she parked like a shrine, always polished, always in view. I needed her to park it on my property, so I set a trap. I left my side gate ajar and placed a stack of fake documents on my workbench, labeled HOA Misconduct Report and Legal Action Pending. I aimed one camera at the papers, another at the gate, and waited. Margaret couldn't resist a scandal. Sure enough, on a chilly Thursday night, she slunk in, her Cadillac idling just inside my driveway. She wore gloves this time, her flashlight darting across the papers as she snapped photos, whispering excitedly. I sipped a cola, watching from my office monitor. When she stepped deeper into the garage, I triggered a remote mechanism. I'd regate a chain that lowered the door halfway with a loud clank. She yelped, dropped a paper, and bolted. I let the door close fully, locking her out. She didn't notice her Cadillac was still on my land until she turned and saw me on my porch, waving calmly. "I'll be back with the board," she snapped, storming off on foot. I nodded, then pulled on my welding gloves. I'd pre-cut the steel panels, painted them to blend with the neighborhood's muted palette, and prepped anchor plates. In 2 hours, her Cadillac was encased in a 15-foot steel cage, bolted into the gravel. It wasn't touching the car, no damage, no vandalism, just a fortress she couldn't move without heavy equipment. I welded a sign to the front, "Private Property Exhibit," Unauthorized access zone. Cameras on. By dawn, Willow Creek was buzzing. Neighbors slowed their cars, snapping photos. Kids on bikes gawked, calling it the Cadillac Jail. I sat on my porch, sipping coffee, as whispers turned to laughter. Margaret arrived at 9 a.m., her face a mask of fury. She screeched so loudly that a dog across the street howled. "This is vandalism," she shouted, jabbing a finger at the cage. I pointed to the property line marker, then the camera above my garage. "Want to see the footage of you breaking in?" I asked. She went silent, then stormed off, vowing to call the police. The sheriff, Tom Bradley, showed up an hour later in his pickup, sipping a soda. I knew Tom from a gate I'd welded for his farm. I showed him the footage of Margaret's break-in. He turned to her. "Did you have permission to enter his property?" She rambled about HOA oversight. He cut her off. "Your car's on his land, ma'am. You're lucky he's got a sense of humor." He shook my hand and left, chuckling about wanting a cage for his neighbor's RV. By noon, I'd uploaded the video to a local forum. HOA president breaks in, meets Steel Justice. It spread like wildfire. 20,000 views in hours, comments dubbing the cage the Escalade enclosure. Margaret paced outside, yelling into her phone, threatening lawsuits. 2 HOA board members, Ellen and Roger, arrived, looking drained. I showed them the footage. Ellen sighed. "She's out of control." Roger admitted that the HOA had no claim over my land. They left, refusing to back her. Margaret doubled down, waving HOA bylaws and demanding I dismantle the cage. I reminded her that my property wasn't hers to govern. She screamed about visual blight and fled. Clips of her yelling went viral, soundtracked with dramatic music. A local news blog ran a story, "The Welder versus the HOA Tyrant." I hadn't planned for fame, but I wasn't complaining. Margaret didn't quit. She filed a county complaint, claiming my cage was an unpermitted hazard. The inspector, after seeing my documentation and footage, asked for my business card. Then came a lawsuit: damages, defamation, and emotional distress. My lawyer, a friend from my engineering days, laughed until he coughed. "She's got nothing," he said, drafting a counterclaim for trespassing. The neighborhood shifted. Flyers appeared, calling me a public menace, with a blurry photo of me welding. I framed one for my workshop. Ellen quit the HOA board, fed up. Roger stopped attending meetings. Neighbors started visiting, some with questions, others with beer. "She went too far," they said. The cage became a symbol, not just of my fight, but of everyone's frustration with Margaret's reign. The HOA held an emergency meeting. Residents packed the room, demanding Margaret's removal. She stormed in, calling the cage a disgrace. The crowd booed. An elderly woman snapped, "You're the disgrace, finding my roses." Margaret left in a huff. A vote ousted her as president and loosened bylaws, allowing yard art and colorful mailboxes. I was asked to join the new board. I declined, but offered to weld a community sign, a subtle nod to the cage etched into its design. Margaret's house hit the market a month later. She moved out quietly, her Cadillac towed away in the night. The new owners, a kind couple in their 60s, brought me homemade jam. Willow Creek relaxed. Potlucks replaced complaint letters. I spoke at a local school about civic action, telling kids how I turned anger into steel. They loved it, asking if I'd weld faster next time. I grinned. "You bet." The cage stood for weeks before I dismantled it, donating the steel to a park pavilion. A plaque read, "Forged from a stand for boundaries." The story faded from headlines, but its mark lingered. I went back to welding, my order book full. One client wanted a mailbox shaped like the cage. I said no. Some things stay singular. Years later, walking Willow Creek's quieter streets, I'd see nods from neighbors, flashes of rebellion in painted fences and quirky sculptures. Margaret's control had backfired, unleashing freedom. On my porch one evening, coffee in hand, I watched the sunset. The forge was cold, but the lines I'd drawn steel and moral held firm. If another Margaret ever came knocking, I'd be ready, welder in hand. What do you think? How far would you go to protect your space? Have you faced injustice or overreach in your life? Share your thoughts below. Let's hear your stand on fighting back without violence. Your voice matters.